yeah, and we're gonna have like two speeches from yesterday, and we will follow with what remained for today.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It was a bit of a late night for some of us. I hope you are all well rested. So I'm really pleased to be here and kind of share some of this experience that we have with you, and kind of just talk through and reflect a little bit on some of the ideas that I was hearing yesterday. So a lot of what we spoke about yesterday were ideas about how do we collaborate better? How do we find examples where we have done things successfully and find ways to build bridges between different sectors, whether that's, academia and university and the private sector, whether it's different countries within Africa, whether it's, from Africa outside. So a lot of what we've been talking about is this idea of bridges. The project Alcantara, I think, was a great example of that. And so I want to talk about one of the programs that we've been working on, which is around a much bigger Pan-African innovation support program. But I want to sort of get into a little bit into the thinking that sits underneath this, right? And so I think one of the really important ideas that we've been playing with over the last several years is that in this whole new space game, no one has won. And this is really important because if we were playing according to the traditional space sector, large government-backed space programs, there are very clear winners in this process, people who are far ahead, who have established programs, who are doing incredible things. But the new space game is very different. It's small. It's not about producing 1,000-kilo geosats. It's about producing small constellations. It's around having very, very precise kinds of services that are done at low cost. It's privately funded, not necessarily publicly funded. And so when we start thinking about all of this, we realize that actually, coming from emerging space nations such as South Africa, Morocco, even though we have, quite old space programs in some cases, we are more or less at the same starting point as everyone else. So Mark van Tresco, is a professor of strategy at Oxford, talks about nascent industries in which you don't understand the business models that are going to be successful. And right now in new space, no one knows what a successful business model is going to be 5 or 10 years down the line. And that gives us as emerging space countries the opportunity to play extremely competitively against everyone else. And I think this is a really important principle to remember, that we are at the same starting point as everyone else on Earth. So that's the first thing that I think is really important for us to bear in mind. The second kind of thing that I want you to think about is there is a huge amount of money, private money, flowing into Africa. So venture capital has increased by a little under 4,000% in the last 10 years. So it's doubling approximately every year. So we're sitting at 4 billion. We were in 4 billion in September. We are probably sitting at about 5 billion now at the end of November. And that is including the very dramatic dip in venture capital that we've seen in the last 3 or 4 months. Now, there's going to be a little bit of battle over the next couple of years around venture capital, but everyone is piling into Africa. So this is important because African governments are only spending $500 million a year on their space programs. Venture capital is putting 10 times that amount of money into new companies. So where are you going to get your money from to build new companies? Chances are it's not going to be public sector money. What you can do if you're smart is find ways for public sector funds to leverage and catalyze private sector investment. So matched programs, matched funding, this kind of stuff is a really useful way of thinking about how do we create entrepreneurs and drive an entrepreneurial ecosystem around space. So these two ideas have kind of been at the heart of this big program that we've been running. So the last thing that I want to kind of talk about is how do you actually build industries? And I think this is a really important idea when you look at this from the point of view of an industry development perspective or an agency or development agency perspective. So this particular kind of set of little boxes is a framework around ecosystem development that was developed by a bunch of really, really smart people from around the world, GIZ, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, a bunch of other people thinking about how do you build these entrepreneur ecosystems. And there are these 9 different kind of characteristics that you can look at. And if you look at the group called International Development Innovation Alliance, you can find out more information about that. But if you can summarize this into 3 things, there is a component around building collective action, right? A community of practice. If you get everyone to agree on a vision, that is the first step needed towards building a community. So this idea here is around community. The second is, now that you all kind of agree that you are all rowing in the same direction, you need skills, you need capabilities, you need money, you need networks. These things don't help if you're all pulling in different directions. So you need the motivation first, then you need the skill sets, you need the resource to do this. And lastly, you need to grow competition. You need to be able to have access to markets, you need to drive sales, you need to kind of then start scaling up and growing a business. So these 3 things around community, capability, and competition are kind of like the foundation steps for building these ecosystems. And, you know, when I talk about building ecosystems, that's great from a government perspective, because now, you know, the industry is employing jobs and achieving the outcomes from a public sector perspective. But what it means for you as an entrepreneur is that you are making money, right? And that, you know, when you add up all the entrepreneurs making money and employing people, then you get these great kind of country level outcomes. So these 3 ideas around the fact that no one has won this game yet, there is a whole lot of money coming in, and that we have a relatively clear pathway about how to do this, have helped us to build out this kind of big Africa Year challenge. So this is a Pan-African program that is now in its 8th year. It started in South Africa together with South African Space Agency in 2015. And the idea is that at the time, we look for interesting Earth observation startups. We provide them with some limited amount of incubation support, and then good luck to them. And that was the idea in 2015. Fast forward 8 years, we've received 80 applications from 20 countries across Africa this year, including 2 from Morocco, and 1 of which is in the finals. You'll see that we have spread from just sort of the Southern African region to be covering basically the entire continent. And the number of partners that we're talking about has increased significantly to where we are today. So to give you an idea of this, we have a number of technical partners, AWS, Planet, Maxar, Digital Earth Africa, Esri, all of whom provide a combination of data and technical mentoring. This is probably on the order of, I don't know, $120,000 of support that they provide, both in kind and in their time. There is legal support. How do you build businesses? How do you establish sort of cross-border organizations, IP? There is a significant amount of mentoring that is provided. So there's groups such as Gen Space, which is the Global Entrepreneurship Network, that provide this work. AWS previously brought on board a guy called Tom Soderstrom, who used to be one of their chief engineers for NASA, as a mentor for startups. So the kind of level of support provided is significant. And what we've been doing the last year is now running this into a tech demo day in front of investors to actually directly get VC investment. So we've moved this from this idea of just like looking for some startups and giving them a little bit of incubation support and then hoping that they survive, into a much more extensive program in which there is technical support, there is incubation, there is money, there are networks. And this is, I think, is the last really important thing, is because now all these groups have relationships with some of the most important space companies in the world. And those relationships will stand them in good stead, even if their startup fails today. That social capital helps them over time. So this is where we are now. And so I wanted to sort of dig a little bit, just for a couple of moments, into how we got to this, because it's great to see this as an end state, but like, how did we actually get here? So as I mentioned, we started in 2015, and the idea was quite simple. So we, one of the companies that I work for, Reese, was next to South African Space Agency. So our offices were next to each other. That was how this whole thing started. It was entirely because we were meeting and having coffee and talking about things, and that's where this idea came about. And so we ran this really small program. It was National Space Agency, Reese, and the Innovation Precinct that we were involved in, which was a government-backed program called the Innovation Hub. And so we ran this for the first few years, and we continuously experimented in what we were doing. So we ran a very, very open program, anything to do with Earth observation. We ran an incredibly targeted program in which we said we're only going to look for solutions in 1 year, for example, in mining, in environment, in South Africa, in EO. And so as we kind of went through this process, we continuously refined and learned what we do. And so there is an annual feedback program that we have with all partners to understand what are we doing right, what are we doing wrong. And as we kind of build up on all of these smaller wins, more and more people join us. Now, this has been funded to a greater and lesser extent across the years. In some years, we've had a lot of funding from people. In some years, we've had a small amount of funding from people. But, and having a core anchor, which has been my firm, has helped to drive this. But there were a couple of really big shifts in our thinking that have shown some really big changes. So the first is, so this period here was all in South Africa. And we kind of grew from 10 to 25, which is not bad over 5 years, I guess. And then in 2020, we said, well, let's actually try and move this outside of South Africa. So let's move this to being a regional program. And so we looked at the Southern Africa, and we kind of also looked at Kenya at the time. So that was kind of great. And we said, well, let's actually extend this and let's do a bigger continental launch. It was still just in English, but you can see that in 2 years, we more than doubled, which is a pretty big jump. And then this year, you said, okay, well, what we're missing the fact that many people in Africa do not speak English. So how do we add on French-speaking Africa as the next stage? And so now we jumped up to 80. So in this 2-year period, we've seen an increase of 130, 140% compared with like the same change in like a 5-year period beforehand. So there's still a lot of stuff that we need to figure out, right? We should definitely add Portuguese. We should definitely add Arabic, right? That closes out the major kind of language groups across the continent. The other aspect if I go back, you'll see that there are, for example, so SANS is here, Kenyan Space Agency is, Rwandan Space Agency is here. Some of you may know RCMRD. They're a big multilateral Earth observation group that operates primarily from across the east coast of Africa. So they run from Egypt down to South Africa. AfriGeo is part of this. So there are agencies that are deeply involved. ZA Space, who are somewhere on here. I can't actually see their logo now. They're the industry body for South Africa. So they're the MISI of South Africa that are doing this. So one of the things that we've realized is that for this to be really successful, you need a local implementation partner to help drive activities in country. And we've seen, you know, with KSA and RSA coming on this year, we've seen a significant increase in the interest in Kenya and Rwanda. So we can continue to drive this program if we have local partners supporting the implementation down at a national level. So I would be delighted for you to walk with us on this. The challenge is deliberately as open as possible. You won't be able to participate in the 2022 challenge because the finals are in 2 weeks. But you can definitely log on and stream and see who wins, and you can, you know, definitely hope that for the Moroccans around the room that that your firm wins. But I have no influence in that process. Just putting it out there. I mean, you did, but unfortunately, I'm not a judge. I'm not a judge. So yeah, I'd be happy to answer any questions. This is really sort of like a really fantastic and exciting program that we're involved in. And, you know, part of, you know, what I started with around community is this is being done because we have an opportunity to build something collectively and build bridges across the continent. And we need people to walk with us. And so I invite you to do that. So, and if there are any questions,
I have a question. I have a question, David.
Yes.
So I couldn't agree more with you with everything you said. Actually, I might steal some stuff with taking pictures. You developed it. I don't have to develop it. Awesome. So you said we're on even ground right now, which is, yes, we are. The only thing is the technicalities. And I think you answered some of it. I just want to know more. Integration and test, vibration shakers and vacuum chambers and all that. No, we're not on even ground here. If I go to the US, every university that has a space science engineering center. They don't have to worry about that.
Sure.
So are those partners and supporters are providing that for the people you work with?
Sure. So let me start by saying, when I talk about even ground here, it's like I'm very aware that we do not have access to the same resources that exist elsewhere in the world. Like, this is clear. But it doesn't matter if they are throwing good money after bad because their business models suck. Right? It doesn't matter if you have vibration testing chambers if the business and the revenue stream that you intend to get out of your satellite never emerges. Right? So that is the fundamental point here. Like, everyone still needs to figure out how you make money in new space. Right? So that's the first point. The second thing is, I think that we do have some of that equipment. Right? We heard from Dr. Islam yesterday that Egypt is putting in significant testing facilities. South Africa has significant testing facilities. Tunisia has significant testing facilities. It might not be the entire value chain, but it does exist. So I think one of the things that we need to do is to understand where we have these resources and be able to connect them. Now, we have a lot of partners, but we don't have every partner imaginable. And I also think that there should be other competitors to what we're doing. Like, there should be other people running challenges, right? So we can also up our game. Like, it's difficult to be the only runner in a race. But I think that as we understand where these assets are and we build out this bigger organization, we can start addressing some of those problems a lot more clearly.
Fantastic. I didn't know Egypt's are
Yep.
And so that's exactly it. We need to know what everything is.
Exactly.
And instead of Morocco going and installing some very expensive, let's do what Egypt doesn't have and complement each other.
Yep.
I think that's the big idea.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Mr. Davis, thank you for this amazing speech and this intricate map about like business and innovation. We have one more question. Okay.
I just want to take the time to thank Riz for supporting us, not only for the great speech, but as you said, I really liked something. The ground might not be fair, but we can definitely do it. And it's a great opportunity for Africa to seize. We're all starting in this, but this doesn't mean we cannot do it. So thank you for your great words, but also thank you for your support. Thank you. I really appreciated the fact that you cited the journey of rice, but throughout this journey, you're also investing in youth and giving back to Africa and the community. And for that, Iman and I are, on the behalf of the organizing team, want to thank you for that. And if we can please go back for the pictures.
Sure.
Better.
Thank you. Thank you.
So please, the last question, and then we will move really quickly to Mr. Guido Schwartz.
Okay, thank you very much. Here's Charles, and congratulations for this. I think this year especially, you made a lot of echo with this activity, and I was about to support this for the translation part. So I'm happy to contribute for the upcoming.
You're hired.
Yes, yeah. So first thing is, what is kind of the success stories that can be seen as impact out of the first 5 years that you can kind of highlight, and some of the interesting, key topics that has been brought up, like maybe during this recent challenge. But my real question is, what do you think about the special purpose acquisition companies? Do you think it is like SPAC realistic in Africa or not?
Okay, so the first question. Sorry, the first question. The first 5 years of the program, I'm going to say the impact was nothing.
Oh no.
That's what it is. I mean, we did a lot of work. I think that we, built a lot of awareness of the industry, but I cannot point to a startup that raised $1 million. But that's to be expected, right? This is a new industry, and to have achieved that success is difficult. So persistence is the lesson that we learned from that. You said, then, are there any key insights?
Topics, etc. Some of the topics that, like, interesting topics that has been addressed during the challenge.
Oh, sure. I mean, so 50% of the startups that have come through have been in agriculture. That's the common theme that we see every year. But we have seen everything from video games to human rights to mining to plastic pollution in the ocean to waste management. There's a very, very long tail of interesting programs. SPACs, no, I don't think they're going to work. I think that they are financial sorcery and we should avoid them.
Okay, thank you.
Well, now we move forward with Mr. Guido Schwartz. He's a person who's been doing a lot on the African continent, a lot of initiatives. He's director of New Space and STEM Foundation for Space Development in Africa. So welcome, and please, we look forward to hear your presentation.
Merci beaucoup. Salam alaikum. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. I hope you slept well. I slept like a baby, I must admit. So I have definitely to come back to Morocco. Okay, so better? Awesome. I think we're going to start a little bit differently today, because not just because it's still a little bit early, but I think yesterday was a very exciting day with a lot of interesting insights. So Mr. Smith from NASA was doing a very good statement yesterday, and I would like actually to repeat this just for all of you to really listen and to really suck it into yourself. He was saying, thanks to you on inspiring the older generation when it comes to space. I really like that, because that's the truth at the end of the day. You inspiring the next generation. You're inspiring the older generation. And you are the generation what brings space now forward and on the next level, and in particular in Africa, when it also comes to commercial aspects. I would like to ask you a question, because that was also yesterday very often discussed. For those of you who thinking that there is still a lot of capacity building necessary in Africa, in space, please raise your hand. Okay, so I'm wondering how many people will actually raise the hand with my next question. How many of you actually thinking that a lot of capacity development is necessary when it comes to space in Africa? So you see, we have now some kind of conflict, right? So what I'm trying to say with that is, at the end of the day, I think there is more than we all think. I really like the question with the vacuum chamber just now, because the reality is this kind of technology is existing on the continent. A bit more of a Pan-African approach might be necessary for this. When you look around yourself, yes, many of you are students, but many of you are the customers of tomorrow. You are the employees, you are the entrepreneurs, you are the users of the application that's getting developed. Never forget that, because you're not just a student who wants to get a job. Companies need you, because otherwise the business model is not running, or you creating a business model that is necessary for other customers. And I think this is a very important step. So my name is Guido. I'm representing the Foundation for Space Development Africa. We're trying to push the topic of space within the African continent as well as beyond. I have the pleasure to do it in particular in Europe, to make people aware that the second biggest continent in the world actually has a lot of space activities and a lot of space heritage. So when you're getting around tonight in the city, imagine Africa has 1 billion inhabitants today, more than 1 billion already. It will actually come up until 2050 to 3 billion. In a very short period of time, the population is almost tripling. What is amazing about this fact is that more than 50% of this population will be younger than 25. That means you're representing the youngest population on our entire planet. So now, let me see, I got it here. So everyone wants to have modern technology, all those gadgets, those notebooks and cell phones and earphones and navigation systems and many, many, many more things. So there's obviously a very strong need for technology that is related to space applications. With 3 billion people, just imagine how many space applications we're talking about. Already today, 50% of the inhabitants of Africa having a smartphone. Around 25% having 5G connections. But now imagine all the people on the continent who don't have it. That's your market. That's what has to be developed in the next couple of years. And at the end of the day, Africa is the place for it. So just to give you some some background on history facts. So Africa has a long tradition. I mentioned it yesterday already. The first rocket tests have been taken place in the north of Africa, in Algeria, in the 60s. There is information existing that South Africa did tests towards the Mozambican border already in the end, in the mid of the 40s. So in Kenya, you have a launch pad that the Italians and the NASA were using in the past. There is now activities that look like that Italy will try to revamp that. So let's say Europe's heritage is actually based on African activities when it comes to space. It's the same for NASA. NASA was launching, in particular, sounding rockets from Kenya. In that regard, capacities were even developed further. Not built, developed. And that's still what happens today. Davis was just nicely describing what role South Africa plays in that context. South Africa was already having a complete launcher, 3-stage launcher, ready in the end of the 80s. They wanted to launch. They wanted to go into space. They built big satellites, and they wanted to become a spacefaring nation, the first one in Africa, which is quite exciting if you think about it. France has already used launch pads in Africa. The US have used them. And even Germany, what was pretty surprising for me, I don't know who came across that story, but the first private startup ever in history, called OTRAC, Munich-based company, operating in the 70s to the 80s, raised $200 million back then just to make space activities happening on the launcher side. And they launched from Zaire. It didn't work out at the end of the day, I can also tell you that. But nevertheless, the first space startup, and it was not Elon Musk in that context, the first space startup actually came or was operating on the African continent, which is an extremely exciting fact. We have heard yesterday about activities that ESA is running and the interest into the continent. ESA was negotiating with a couple of parties 5, 6, 7 years ago. And they were very close to talking to South Africa concerning becoming a member of ESA, an associated member like Canada or Switzerland. I think this is something that every African country should strive for, that we're looking into what kind of collaborations can be achieved in between Europe and Africa and learn from each other, but also support each other in getting forward. It is the same with other regions in the world. We talked a lot about collaborations yesterday. It would be necessary to go into even more and deeper collaborations to not have questions like where are I going to get the vacuum chamber from? Where do I am able to test? Where do I get my components from? Where do I launch? A lot of questions can be raised in that context. So since time is running, let me go to the next slide. The ministerial conference has happened now in Europe, and a lot of money is invested into the European space launcher, the Ariane rocket. However, it was also pushed that startups getting a better chance and getting much more visibility. So there is at the moment 3, 4 startups existing who are professionally in a commercial way looking into small launches. And an interesting fact is that there were already activities running which are now in 2022 running in Europe that have taken place in Africa around the millennium. People were thinking about creating their own launchers for African products, for African solutions, for African people. So the time was maybe not right, but it seems so that much more investment capital is now going into the country. There's a lot of facts happening. What I personally like is that around 20,000 people working currently in Africa across the continent in space. It sounds amazing to me, the number. I had the pleasure already to meet a couple of them, but not all of them. But you will actually be one of them, hopefully. You will push this topic forward. You will bring Africa even stronger on the map in an international context. So if you see the numbers, the economic value was already mentioned yesterday. We're talking 20 billion when it comes to space in Africa. What an amazing number. I mean, it's outstanding. And when you look at what was spent so far, so 500 and, I was writing that down because it's interesting numbers, around 535 million dollars are spent in Africa when it comes to space. If you look into Europe, it was just decided 17 billion in the next 5 years. But if you look to America, and unfortunately the gentleman from NASA is not here anymore, but 24 billion annually, NASA budget. So what is interesting, that Africa is pretty commercialized. It is maybe the most commercialized continent when it comes to space, because there's 2 streams running here. So you have the streams with the universities where research-related satellite projects running in particular. On the other side, you have companies that operating in the small sat market. The most common market here is small sats, CubeSats, Pico, Nano, because that's the size that the continent can afford and where the continent is good in. And that's good because we're tending to have a miniaturization in technology. So I remember in the 80s when you were watching this really interesting movies from the States, when they were having those massive telephones in their cars, like you needed almost 2 hands, you know, to put it on your ear. I mean, look in your pockets now. They get even smaller now with the flips. So the same happens with satellites. Satellites get smaller. So small satellite launchers have definitely a future, or having the opportunity to go on the future market. And Africa is always looking for solutions that are not that common. So with Subsandila Sat, which was actually supposed to work for 9 years, the satellite had a lot of hiccups. Nevertheless, engineers were like working on it. They tuned it, and it was running 12 years at the end of the day. I think it's the only CubeSat in the world who was running so long. So who knows about that? The reality is, unfortunately, no one. So all those kind of informations have to be taken out in the world. People have to know about that this kind of skills are existing. And that in particular, Africa is super creative when it comes to innovation and to making things happening out of relatively small means, but really like bringing it on the next level. A couple of days ago, the biggest rocket in the world was actually launched, the Artemis rocket. Interesting enough, the NASA can just do this because Africa is helping. So all the telemetry, the pictures that you see on television when the rocket is flying in the sky, those data coming from African ground stations. One is in Nigeria, another one is in South Africa. And NASA has now decided for all the deep space missions that are taking place, they will even upgrade ground stations and install new ones. So South Africa will get, for instance, one 200 kilometers away from Cape Town, which will directly work with the Artemis missions in future. And just to be clear on that, it is the first time that people going into deep space. It's the first time that people returning now to the moon after 50 years. And Africa is playing a crucial role in this. So my focus were supposed to be a little bit on what businesses are possible. I think you are much more known or much more used to what is displayed here than myself. Because you have, as I said, 2 streams. You have the research stream and you have the business stream. So the European Union has a program in place which is called the EU Global Action on Space, where they're bringing on a global scale startups from Europe together with startups from Africa. I have the pleasure to support in that process because they want to create joint projects, and the European Commission, in this case, is putting together the necessary assistance to make this happening. Then you have a couple of research projects. However, as mentioned yesterday, that's opportunities, definitely. But if you want to create business yourself. Become an entrepreneur. Look for funding, look for solutions, and convince the ecosystem around you that African solutions have the power actually to create applications that Africans can use. You are the business at the end of the day. you are those who bringing the sector on the next level and who hopefully shaping the future when it comes to commercialization in space, because everyone in the world can still learn what commercialization really means, because Africa is living it today already. Davis was giving some insights on this. What is interesting is we have around 680 technology centers, startup technology centers on the African continent today, but not one on space. My question is, why not? Whoever has an answer on that can please approach me afterwards, because I would love to see what the reasons are for that. So there's different sources, but they're saying this year Africa will see investments of $4 to $5 billion. This number goes up every year. I think much more should go into space. So please, found some startups, talk to Davis and to others. You have a great initiative here in Morocco running. So see what you can do. Because that must not be just a movie. That must not just be a dream. At the end of the day, technology is existing, and if we're all thinking on a bigger level, then there must be nothing that is holding us back. Africa will play a crucial role. As I said in the beginning of my presentation, it will have the biggest population in a couple of years. Solutions are needed anyways. And why shouldn't solutions be better than in a developed world? There's more needs for space. We had an African astronaut already a couple of years ago. There's wonderful renderings existing when it comes to how does space look like in Africa in the future. Kenya thinks about a spaceport. There's initiatives on the STEM side. There's initiatives on the satellite side to play a more crucial role to get a bigger market share, which is necessary. If you have listened to my presentation, then you have realized actually Africa needs a bigger share in the global context, because here's the market of the future. Yesterday it was mentioned that the African Free Trade Area is in place. Interesting fact, it's the biggest in the world. It's not NAFTA, it's not the European Union, it's actually Africa. So thank you for your attention, and yeah, shape the future. Yes, questions? No, it goes. Go, Iman, go.
Hello, sir. How are you doing?
Good, good.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation. It was wonderful. Basically, I'm having two things to talk about. The first remark, you just said that 25% of African countries have 5G. What are the countries that have 5G, please?
Sorry?
What are the countries having the
It's
5G,
not,
please?
unfortunately, it's not just working like that. It is it's a general distribution. That's what the numbers say across the continent in different countries, because there's already some countries who are running on 5G. I'm aware about South Africa, and I think it's the same for Kenya. But which countries exactly, I can't tell you, but I can look it up.
Okay, thank you. I'm just asking this because the neighbors or even Morocco don't run with 5G. That's why. The second thing is that we're just saying that Africa is the future. Africa will have, as you just said, the most higher percentage of youth in just a few years. Well, basically, we're encouraging Africans youth to work on satellites, and we're calling it space. Do you think space has only satellites? Well, space is more than that, and space science is more than satellites. When we're talking about 48 satellites that was launched, is only about climate change, maybe some about security for those countries, but not really about exploration of the world of the external space or other stuff. And When we're talking about future, we're talking about US, about Russia, about Europe, those three big franchises of science and of development. Do you think that they're going to just let the first place to Africa, and they're doing too much effort to be at the first place? Thank you.
It's funny that it is switching off on its own. Thank you very much for your question. I wouldn't look into what is allowed. Someone told me once, just do and excuse yourself afterwards. So when you look into China, Europe, the US, and when it comes to demographics, you will easily see that the societies are like strongly aging, strongly aging. With a very young, big population on the planet, and time is developing. I have actually nothing that I see what could Africa hold back as long as Africa goes into this direction. I mean, you have to shape the future. I can just look at it, what you do, all of you. I mean, you are now becoming those decision makers who have then to negotiate with others. Reality is, space is always about collaboration, and space is not just satellites. Space is data, space is Earth observation, space is collaboration, space is being curious. Many aspects, and all of them have to be fulfilled. And I don't see that any country in the world will say, no, don't do this. We don't like that. So I think Africa is now in the path for the development, and there is nothing that will get in between. That's my personal opinion.
There is also Mr. Davis Cook here that wants to also answer the question of the delegates.
So Guido, I was actually going to ask if you could also talk about the square kilometre array.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Yeah, that's true. Just to give you some insights, because people waiting already, I think I'm running late. Okay, cool. Gracias. So Davis is totally right. Who knows about the square kilometre array? But that's not fair, but thank you very much, sir. I was sure that you know. Exactly, the square kilometre array. It will become the biggest radio astronomy telescope in the world. It's a joint undertaking in between Africa and Australia. Africa is having facilities from the southern tip of the continent up to the desert of the Sahara, with many stations looking into space. I was just asking yesterday the gentleman from NASA concerning the James Webb Telescope if there is plans actually to bring them together so that you have the full picture at the end of the day. Many jobs will be created in this context because many researchers are needed. It will be a very strong deep space view to better understand where we're coming from, where our planet is coming from, how the universe was developed, and many other questions will be hopefully answered. So thanks, Davis, for actually pointing to this. You're absolutely right. I forgot to say that.
We have a second question, but please be quick because we're running out of time.
Okay. Hi, I'm Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
Yeah, you mentioned that one way we can improve space in Africa is by making our own companies and startups. I wanted to ask, as a young student doing bachelor's, where do we start? Because I'm still lost. Because let's say after this event, if I go back home, what do I do? I'm still lost. How do I even start and do something like that? Yeah.
So first of all, you should develop an idea. You should have a vision, and then you should put some bone around, some meat around the bone. And then you look around. I mean, there's 5 billion that got invested on the continent. A lot of that is going into agri-tech, into fintech, but why not into space tech? So do a bit of research. There's venture funds existing. There's angels investors. They look for opportunities. There's a lot of money at the moment in the market. There's programs running that helping startups creating business plans. There's 684, I think, tech centers existing at the moment. There must be some of them also in Morocco. Get in touch with those, see what they can do, tell them about your idea, what you want to do, how to push it forward. and then also talk to the ladies which are sitting here in front from the European Space Agency. Sorry, because they have schemes, for instance, on startups in Europe running already since a decade. Startups that are just in space. Maybe this helps. Good. I think we're doing this bilateral because otherwise I got into trouble. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm wishing you a good conference.
Hello. One more question, please. Sorry. I'm Mahfoud Wahabahi. I'm a retired diplomat. I'm a guest here and very, very glad to see all these youth and experts, researchers, professors present. I have like a dilemma and really deep obsession with the problematic of brain drain. Can you touch on this? I know that this is first and foremost responsibility of our governments, but also of business communities, of civil society organizations, of everybody, in fact. Thank you.
Okay, then normally I could then, I think, talk for another half an hour. I will try to make it relatively quick. Brain drain is a massive topic. I just had yesterday the pleasure to have a couple of talks about this here during the conference. I was 6 years ago in Kenya at the University of Nairobi, and they already lecturing aerospace engineering there since 15, 20 years. But there's no jobs available for the graduates. So I met taxi drivers who have a degree in aerospace engineering, which was very sad. I think there is a need for commitment by governments if they want to follow this path. And I think a perfect enabler and a wonderful opportunity is the African Space Agency. Because when there is curricula existing at universities, but there is no sector, then it is always complicated actually to ensure that the brain drain is not happening. I have met people from different countries around the world who went to Europe and who are making a difference today in the European aerospace sector. And they're good. They're really, really good. But I also see that the younger generation thinks in a different spectrum. Many of them trying to find ways to bring their knowledge back to their countries. It doesn't always work, but very often they go there, they give lectures, they're trying to inspire people, they're trying to support startups in that area voluntarily. And I think this has to be more promoted and it has to be more made visible so that even more people get inspired from that. In the past, it was always people left Africa, went into Europe, went to the, what's it, Union Exchange? They were working and sending money back home. That was the common activity. Today, more and more knowledge is getting sent back. There's an initiative running. I know a couple of people myself who working in daily jobs, but during their holidays, they're not just going back home for making holidays back home and seeing the family. They're giving lectures. They're going to schools. They're inspiring pupils, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, just by what they're doing and trying to show them, don't do it somewhere else, do it here. Yeah. Muy bien. I hope it answers a little bit the question. Before I'm getting in trouble, I have to leave. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Guido. Like for sure in Africa, we follow and pursue science in a very unconventional way, but this might be the source for having a springboard for innovation and doing things differently than the rest of the world. So now I leave you with a speech by Meta Visionaries. Yeah, sure.
I just need the projector. No, it's on Zoom. So just need to, yeah. You need to put the power or something? No, it's okay. I have enough power. No, it's Wasim is. Oh, 1 second. Do we have the?
How do you use HDMI there, you know?
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Perfect.
Wasim, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Wonderful. So you are ready to go. like people are seeing you.
Wonderful. Okay, so we're ready to go now.
Yeah, you can start.
Fantastic. Okay, so I've got sharing access. All right. First of all, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful event over the last 2 days, and unfortunately, we couldn't be there physically, but I'm glad that we have got the opportunity to attend, even if it's remotely. And Camilla's obviously been there, and there's been some fantastic stuff coming out of this particular workshop. So thank you to the organizers for putting it together. And welcome. My name is Wasim. I'm the CEO of Visionaries, which is also a co-partnership with Space Applications on a project called Metaspace. And today, I'm going to be focusing on how do we relate what we're doing, because we know why space, everybody's been talking about it, but how do we make sure that it actually connects with people globally? Because for me, the most important thing is getting everyday person to realize that space is a fundamental aspect of their life. So what I'm going to do is share screen. This is actually I want to show you, when I say a physical space innovation lab connected to the International Space Station, first of all, this is exactly what I mean. This is through our partners IceCube, where we're able to send various payloads to space or cubes, and run various different experiments and so on. And this was a project sent by one of our partners called Project Maleth, by a scientist named Professor Borge, which was focused on diabetes. So these physical space innovation labs that we're going to be talking about are connected to the ISS, and this is just an example of one piece of that particular work. So now I'm going to go into the presentation. So first of all, a bit about Metaspace and Visionaries. Our whole goal is to give access to the space economy. And we do that by utilizing physical space innovation labs, which I've just mentioned to you, which gives you access to the International Space Station, has an engineering component, but also there's a strong human capacity building side, which Camilo elaborated on yesterday, focused on utilizing a metaverse environment so that you can be born anywhere in the world, but connect to some of the greatest experts in real time from anywhere. But I'm going to now focus on the lab component particularly. So just briefly, why space? Again, all of you know this really well. So, and I'm going to put it in a different context. Like, we didn't start talking about STEM and STEAM until 2000s and onwards. And we didn't start talking about the 4 C's, like creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, and communication until the last, say, 20 odd years in schools. But space has been doing it from the start. And I mean, it's been doing it with countries all around the world. And this is why space is the means through which I feel we can tackle something really important that's happening. And what that is we are experiencing a rate of change which is exponential. And not only is it exponential, it's super rapid. So how do you manage that? How do you deal with a phenomenon where every 6 months is changing? By 2040, the rate of change is going to be 4x. So 3 months are going to be equivalent to 3 decades. And how do we deal with that? For me, the solution is space. But in order to really effectively utilize that, we need to get non-space industry involved with the space economy. And for me, that is an absolute essential framework for us to really demonstrate why space is so important. And this is why we've built this model, where we utilize these hands-on physical labs combined with the metaverse component, so that it gives access to communities all over the world, where not only do they get to learn advanced skills, new skills, which, by the way, they can apply in every area of their lives, as many of you will know, but most importantly, also they get to connect with industry leaders in real time. So not only are they building capacity, but they're able to apply what they're doing. And that's why the physical component with the metaverse is so important. Again, some of these things most of you already know. So I'm actually going to go focus on what our whole kind of idea and mission is. And what we're trying to do is connect the space industry to the non-space industry. So how do we go about doing that? So one of the things we do is we connect activities to the medical sector. We look at things like, for example, what are really affecting people's lives, diabetes. How can we connect something like diabetes to space? And Project Mallet, for example, is an example of that, where tissue cells were collated and collected and put part of this cube, which was then sent to the ISS to study people who get foot ulcers as a result of diabetes and what changes in the microbiome. Okay, this is just one example of what we can do, and relating it to something that everybody will start to build an interest in. The other thing we do is we utilize sports, entertainment, and music to highlight everything we're doing with space, as well as the science. So we'll utilize these labs because we have a media component on the space station. We're able to do some really cool stuff, like have talks directly with astronauts in space. We're able to do art in space. We're able to do projects where kids can send ideas and in the form of artwork or music to space, really to inspire a whole generation so that they can really activate and learn what's possible. But indirectly, that affects also the people who we need to connect with now, who can use space and use satellite communication and use Earth observation to really impact the way they work. I'm going to give you give you an example here on how we are positioning our labs. And again, I'm not going to go into technical detail because I really want you to understand the concept. So imagine an insurance company, right? And you go to an insurance company and you've got a space innovation lab which has access to data from space in real time through an operations control center. You go to an insurance company and you say, hey, you know what? This is a parking lot next to this supermarket, and this is how much money you've been paying out in this particular location. What if we could give you the data and tell you exactly where the accidents are happening, how often they're happening from 10 years worth of data imagery, and help you figure out what potentially could happen and where the accidents are going to happen again? And how much is that worth to you, right? Now, I have not even had to mention space, but I've connected space to this non-space industry sector in a way that makes sense to them, but also furthers my own goals and our goals in terms of connecting space to industry. So these are just some of the things that we're able to do with these space innovation labs, and really get people to understand what we're doing out there. Again, a lot of these things that you're seeing in terms of monitoring environment, water, land, these are all possible through these labs, or rather hubs. And again, you're going to be very familiar with a lot of the stuff we're talking about here. Again, we're looking at how do you monitor or utilize Earth observation to see, for example, cultivation of crops, or see what's happening with water salinity, or take underwater measurements. All of these things are going to be absolutely essential for us to tackle the complex challenges we're facing in terms of sustainability and growth. One of the other things that we do, as I said, with these labs is there's a big component of utilizing awareness and building opportunities for different sectors that we think are not related and bringing them together. So I gave you an example of what we could do with the labs with the insurance. The one thing I do want to leave you with, because rather I'd like to actually have a conversation and any questions you have, see how we can answer them, is sports and entertainment, and how do we bring those sectors in? Yesterday, I think Camilla briefly mentioned, you look at a makeup brand like Estee Lauder and what they're doing on the space station in terms of how they can remove plastics from their products. Or you look at a company like Adidas, which is looking at developing new materials. You look at companies like Toyota. So one of our co-founders is from a family that is one of the largest distributors for Toyota. And of course, Toyota is developing the next Land Rover. So these are just some of the links that you can all start thinking about, because it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're a scientist, an engineer, your biggest challenge is going to be how you're going to get the funding, how you're going to commercialize, and how you're going to use whatever skills you have and bring in the non-space industry sector. That is our goal for what we're doing with Metaspace, what we're doing with these space innovation labs, and what we're doing with the metaverse. So I hope that was helpful. And now I'm going to open up to any questions because a lot of what I've said, I'm sure is very familiar with, but I'd like to more talk about our concept of how we're trying to bring a non-space industry on board.
Thank you, Wasim. We have two questions over there. Let me.
Hello, hi. Thank you for the presentation. We actually in the team in the SGAC Egypt, we were actually thinking about organizing and inviting people for analog missions in Egypt, because the Egyptian desert could act as like a substitute for the space in Mars, for example. So could we pair up with Metaverse to provide a simulating environment to like a mission simulation on Earth, and someone is talking to you from a control center? Because that's one of the things we're seeing, that you could benefit a lot from simulating and getting commands from our control center. So I would like to see your take on that. And also I wanted to ask about the communication delay and lag, and how the metaverse system overcomes it when you are simulating an experiment in outer space and you are here on Earth. So there'll be a communication delay or lag. And you talked about the Earth Observation Lab. I myself, my research is on algae. So could Metaverse, for example, advise a researcher on best places on the coastal line to cultivate seaweed or algae? And also, how could individual researchers connect with Metaverse to send the experiments, like specimens, for experimentation ISS? Thank you.
Wonderful. So that was like 5 or 4 questions, not just 2. That's brilliant. Let me, on terms of, let's talk about connection. I mean, one of the main things that's going to determine how effective this can be is connection speeds. And as you noted, there is a lag, but I mean, there's got to be an impetus for mass adoption of this for there to be a case where we do focus on improving the speed at which we have access. But by the way, that's going to happen anyway, regardless. And I think that is something that, thankfully, because of the number of applications that are utilizing communication, for me, that's something that is going to improve, get better, until it becomes completely seamless. The more we adopt, the more we utilize what we're talking about, the quicker it's going to make leaps and bounds in terms of that growth. And so yes, valid point, but I'm not as concerned about that, because I think there's so many areas we're going to be using communication, and I think that will grow. And once it's seamless, it's fantastic. Researchers, absolutely. So one of the things with research, let's imagine we didn't have the virtual reality, or we didn't even have Zoom or any of these ways of connecting through video. For me, research, one of the biggest hurdles is speed. And the second biggest hurdle is connecting experts and people around the world to different elements of research. And if one thing COVID taught us to a certain extent is now today, there is no reason why you have to get on a flight to meet an expert. Like why could a kid in Rwanda not connect with someone like Jim Green? They can. But the element, okay, how effective is it technically from being face-to-face? Well, I think Camilo kind of showed you a CubeSat lesson we did in the metaverse. I mean, this thing is going to improve. It's not perfect, but it's going to get more and more effective. So one of the key things for the metaverse for me is your ability to, one, collaborate with people around the world in a time which is rapid, Two, the technical ability in certain aspects, especially when you look at mixed reality, you're going to be able to do things that normally, would be taking not only longer, but harder to express. So think about Marvel and Iron Man, I think is very doable. HoloLens especially has demonstrated that. And I think your other question, sorry, what was your first question? Yeah, I agree. Analog missions, I think, is a fantastic way, not just combining the physical with the metaverse, so that you can really test the simulations and then apply them. I mean, you cannot replace the physical aspect, but what the analog missions can be done in terms of the metaverse is ideating, trialing, looking at the effects. I mean, as the technology improves, it's going to be as real as it gets. So I see a direct link there. And again, it's the ability to bring people together from different places in the world. So that was that. And was there a fourth question that I didn't catch on?
No, you talked about the Earth Observation Lab and
Yeah.
the fact that you could measure underwater.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, like we're really running out of time. And I mean, I see, I really enjoy, I like the fact that you're asking questions, and I would like to invite you to get in touch with the Dr. Wasim. And these questions actually, it's really nice to hear them because they are opportunities, in fact. So we will move forward with the next panel discussion about business and opportunities.
Thank you, Wasim. I will just
It's a
close
very
this.
interesting-
Thank you, everyone. And yeah, definitely I will connect you with my boss, okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you. No worries. Take care. Bye.
Recording stopped.
We follow now with the panel discussion, and I'd like to invite once again on the stage, Mr. Davis Cook. Do we have Mr. Davis Cook? Yeah, he will be joining us soon. Mr. Schwartz, welcome back. And Mr. Radim. And Dr. Gemgami Farid. Dr. Gemgami Farid is coming to us from Berlin Space Technology, where he's the Chief Strategy Director. Radim, everybody knows. Without him, this event wouldn't have happened. He's the founder of 2 space startups, so he's going to talk about it. No need to introduce Mr. Cook and Mr. Schwartz. Hello, everybody. So we will be talking about how to incorporate an environment for commercial space in Africa. So we're not talking space agencies, we're not talking government sector, we're talking private sector here. And I would like to start with a question to every one of you, and I would like to get an answer and each of yours points of views. We heard Davis talking earlier about the low-hanging fruits, about that space is not only launchers and big satellites, but it's more than that. Would you please just explain a bit more? What are the low-hanging fruits for the African continent? What can we do that is easier than launching?
Thank you. So I think, first of all, the upstream gets a lot of visibility in the press, right? You have very, very big, names throwing themselves around all over the place. But upstream represents actually a very small percentage of the global space value chain, right? It's 4 or 5% of the total amount of money, whereas when you look at midstream and downstream, they are significantly larger. So they're also, particularly as you sort of go further downstream, your entry barriers to the sector are much lower. So I think that there are opportunities to start understanding how the space sector works, that you can play a role in there, particularly downstream. The other thing that we don't always think about is we often bring a very strong engineering focus to our work. But there is really interesting stuff that happens in space law. There is really interesting stuff that's happening around journalism. So, there are also opportunities to get exposure to the sector, not purely through an engineering perspective, but also through these other angles that are really important, given understanding what's going on, and that allows you to kind of leapfrog into other areas in the industry. So just some high-level thoughts.
So absolutely agree with you that the downstream is the low-hanging fruit, and especially look at what technologies, services, products are available on the market today. Use them to build an application. You don't necessarily need to launch your own satellite. You don't need to do everything from scratch. Actually, there's a very good chance that for your downstream application, everything you need is already available.
Don't even know what to add. So I think one of the aspects when it comes to low-hanging fruit is don't even look into the industry. I would even start earlier, rather look on education. I mean, bring people on a level that they are able to do something in space. Bring people in that regard, kids on a level that they're doing this. I mean, there's projects running on STEM projects in universities. I was just talking to a friend in Kenya who runs a CANSAT project. I mean, they're going to school. It's 10th graders who start building control mechanisms for satellites, or they see what kind of data can be delivered. I think the most low-hanging fruit at the moment is to create a lot of curiosity about space that then gets on the next level.
Thank you. Being the fourth is really hard to add something, right? So, gosh. Yes, no, business-wise, I fully agree with Radim and Davis, but I tend more to to Guido. I talked during the World Satellite Business Week. I talked to officials from the Oman. They don't have yet a space agency, but a space program. And they said exactly the same, thinking business-wise. They went to the low-hanging fruits, as well as economy volume point of view, absolutely. But then I said something very similar to Guido. If you want to inspire people, the youth, it's very difficult to do that with data analytics, right? So if you want to do business, I fully agree. But inspiring the youth to do STEAM, you actually have to do hardware. So yes, in my view, you have to do both. Think business-wise, target the downstream, but at the same time, it is the hardware that fascinates us, right? That works in space.
Keep the mic. So the next question is to you, Doctor, about the brain drain, or more specifically about the use of the African diaspora. How can we use the African diaspora? I mean, we usually, when we hear officials talking, it's always about the brain drain, gray matter-wise, that we are losing people with great mental capacities. But then what about the entrepreneurs? What about those who would start projects and create startups? How can we use the African diaspora? How can we create incentives to bring them back?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, thank you for this question. I've been thinking a lot about it. As I said, I've been recently in Vietnam for business, and beginning of the year actually for vacation. And before going to a country, I always try to make myself familiar with the country. Amazing country, by the way. And while making myself familiar with Vietnam, I came across some articles. In this article, I've read that the Vietnamese diaspora is actually currently pouring back into the country. not only the first generation, but also the second and third generation. They are still in contact with the country, and there is this passion for the country. So on a personal level, I was born in Germany. I was raised in Germany. I have my strong relation to Germany, to my hometown, Dortmund. But being of having Moroccan ancestors, parents from Morocco, I have also this very special relation to Morocco, and I could well imagine actually to come to Morocco. It wouldn't be coming back because I was never here, so to say. But there's a relation, so very similar to the people in Vietnam. So what needs to happen to reverse the brain drain, which by itself is not necessarily something bad. So it's not bad to go abroad and do the experience, but to give something back is actually even better. There have to be the right incentives, and there has to be a framework that actually allows entrepreneurship, that allows growth, and gives you some security. And I'm pretty sure people would sacrifice on a financial level to go back.
We can stay with Mr. Guido, since he's beside you there. Oh, Mr. Schwartz, I think you've heard Mr. Cook this morning talking about the lack of a well-defined business model when it comes to new space, not only here in Africa, but all over the world. And of course, we can learn from their mistakes. But I mean, how can we, because if we say a lack of a strong, well-defined business model, and then in the same time, we're talking VCs and angels and investors, I see this as a conundrum. How can you go to an investor with not so well-defined business model and ask for money?
There's a story. Elon Musk went to the EIC, I think it was in 2006 or 2007. He was coming with 2 people and a band. No joke. He was getting to the EIC, and for the first time he was talking about SpaceX and what he wants to do with it. But to create attention, he was actually getting some Mexican mariachis. I don't know if you know what that is. It's those guys with the big hats, and who are playing Mexican music. So they were actually making music at his booth. So that's how he created a lot of attention, and then he displayed what he wants to do. But he haven't had any kind of really useful business model in place at all. And if you look into a lot of the American startups, even the unicorns, they haven't had it in the beginning. So who is actually telling anyone to have a proper business model in place? You need one, there's no doubt. I mean, if you want to have some investments, you need one. But first of all, as I said earlier, develop your idea, look for people who are interested into this, and then to find the right funding for it, get people who are helping you with the business model. It's very, very easy. And coming to the diaspora aspect, on the one side, people like to come back, yes. People like to send money. People now continuing in a way that is more like giving something back to the society, to the community, which is, I think, personally absolutely brilliant, and it has to be continued. But people like to invest. So people who are in Europe, they have some money at some stage. A lot of them, when they're coming from African countries, first thing that they're doing, if they have a certain level of money, is they're investing into their home country in form of concrete. They're building a house, very simply because they want to go back home. They want to show their kids where they're coming from, where the roots are, where the ancestors used to live. So, but I'm also seeing now there is, for instance, the African Business Angel Network existing. That people like to come back in a form which is more virtual. They want to take their money to Africa and invest into it. When all of the forecasts are right, then Africa will see an average economical growth of 4% per year, which is not too bad. Look at Europe, look at the US. So I think when we want to see those kind of business models working at the end of the day, maybe it's the best in the beginning to convince people who know best the region, the continent, the different countries. And I have seen it very often. African startups, I think the biggest chunk, and hopefully Davis will see it the same way, but the biggest chunk of African startups start with their own money. They're going to mommy and to daddy, they're going to the neighbors, they're going to the uncle, they're going to anyone they know who would give them some money. And that's how they're starting. And then later on, they see that they're going to get real funds.
And instead of the Mexican band, I should have got the number from the band yesterday.
Yes.
I'm taking them to the IC next year. Radim, the next question is to you, and it's personal because you are the founder of two no space startups, which are operational. I think the easy question is, what's the secret? How did you do it?
Well, I think if I had to give you some tips, the first one would be to remember that space, well, in business, space is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. So what do I mean by this? So I think everyone in this room is excited about space, wants to work on cool space projects. But the reality is that why do we go to space? Why do we work on space projects? It is to solve actual problems. So talk to people. I think the big secret really is to talk to people around you, not just space people. Talk to your neighbor. If your neighbor is a farmer, ask your neighbor like what's his biggest struggle, and see if there's any way how with your knowledge of space technologies you could solve their problem. I think my second tip would be to surround yourself with the right people. So when you're starting a company, the team behind the company is absolutely key. Like without the right team, you're gonna fail. And this, I think it's especially important to include, if you're an engineer, to include people from other fields that can help you with the business aspects. It might not be a bad idea to, to include, for example, an artist to better illustrate what you're doing. Like it's extremely important. And I think the last tip, the secret is just to go for it. You have an idea, try it. I mean, like it's easy to talk about successes, but the reality is like when we were starting Ground Space, we had this like brilliant business model with like some great looking numbers. Even VCs were quite interested in what we were doing. Then we went to talk to the market, to potential customers, and it was an absolute failure. Nobody was actually interested in the product we thought would revolutionize the market, and that's all right. Like iterate. If it doesn't work, move on. Try something else.
Thank you. Of course, it's you. And my question to you would stem from your experience. You work closely with African startups, and you've been doing this for years. So you must have data. I want you to share the data with us. And it's not only one question. We may have many questions. We can even ask about diversity in the scene, for example. How does it look like? But let me start with asking you about the fields that you've seen most startups working on. I know you do remote sensing mainly, but you said that probably about 50% is a long list of other activities. But from your experience, your own personal feeling, what are the African startup founders focusing on when it comes to new space?
I'd like to start by jumping up a little bit to talk about like what are the big successful African startups doing, and then I'll jump into space. So, unlike China, which is a single homogeneous legal and economic zone, or the US, which is mostly legally and institutionally homogeneous. There are differences in the states a little bit, but certainly financially integrated, or Europe, which is also financially and economically integrated. Africa has 54 different legal systems, 50 different currencies, many different languages. And so what this does is that, if you think of, US 350 million people operating under a single market, Europe, hundreds of millions of people, Africa has hundreds of millions of people operating under 50 different markets. And that creates all sorts of frictions and barriers between startups that want to scale from one place to the next. If I start a business in Paris, in theory, I can scale that out across the rest of Europe, right? If I start a business in New York, in theory, I can scale it across, the rest of the US. If I start a business in Johannesburg, I can't just scale it out across the rest of Africa because there are all these institutional barriers that exist. And so I think that there are two sets of startups that we're seeing. The one is startups that are very focused on solving a local problem in a country. And in many instances, that is more than enough to build a wildly successful business, right? If there's a lot of money, there are a lot of consumers, you don't need to operate in many different regions. But when you start and look at like the really successful Pan-African startup and tech firms, is they are solving problems around integration across the continent. So things like remittance payments across the country, things like telcos, data provision. So all of these guys are thinking, how do you envision a world in which there are no longer these barriers between countries? And I think that this is a big shift in the thinking around startups. And certainly the more successful ones have that view about how do you operate across these multiple different jurisdictions. So coming to the question around sort of new space firms, particularly from an African perspective, I think that the startups that are going to be more successful are the ones who are thinking in this bigger context, who are thinking, how do we deliver services in a way that is not constrained by 20 different legal environments? How do we operate in a multi-currency kind of space? Because if you lock yourself into one country and one particular problem, you're only able to add value to that particular group of people. And so I think one of the big complexities about this is how do you think about a much broader kind of more generic issue, and that often has to do with this friction and these complications between different regions. And I think that's where some of the exciting new space guys are playing. So this would be, certainly this component manufacturing, but if you look at the way that they're doing kind of data provision, precision agriculture work across sort of wide swaths of area, I think that's where things become quite interesting.
I would like next question for both Dr. Gamgami and Mr. Schwartz. And we're talking commercial applications. We're talking startups, new scene, new space. But all these are nice words. But we're talking about a sector that needs talent. And goes without saying that education should and will play a big role in any new space scene in Africa. My question is, how do you see this happen?
So I said to Guido, it's a tough one. May I? A bit paradox. I think Guido can answer the question much better than me. Because actually, no, really, he lived in Africa. He studied in South Africa, so he knows Central Africa much better than me. But I would like to add something here that is maybe unconventional. So what made me actually go into space? So I studied space engineering, and then I did a PhD in theoretical astrophysics. So I was very delighted yesterday by the talk about from Jim. Back to the roots for me. But why did I took this path? Might be funny for you, but actually I was inspired by the pop culture. So as a young boy, I watched Battlestar Galactica. Of course I'm a Trekkie. That all you know. But it started even earlier. I think I was 5 years old when I was watching Captain Future in Germany and Grandizer in Morocco. Who of you know Grandizer? Yeah. So we immediately bond, right? Only Japanese and Moroccan people know Grandizer. You know too. Yeah, and I met on Instagram someone from. And I know someone from Saudi Arabia. He's also a big Grandizer fan on Instagram. We bonded immediately.
That's the French version, Goldorak. Yep, that's true.
Yeah. Oh, okay. You know too. No, not all. Believe me. In Germany and England, they don't know it. I'm always disappointed. No joke. No, in fact, that inspired me very much. And I always knew I want to do something like that. What I want to say is we need more African productions. That's actually what I want to say. So where are the African-based heroes with the African story? Okay, because right now we are having stories from the US, from Japan, from Europe. But African stories will be very, very different. No, it will be definitely a different theme. There is different religion, mythology behind it. So people will bond even more and it will inspire them even more. So yeah, I studied, did a PhD, but in the end, I'm saying don't underestimate the power of pop culture. And if you make it more authentic, really, you can motivate really many people because it's authentic. You bond to them.
Thank you so much. This was really inspiring. And as a fellow Trekkie, I agree 100%. And did also inspire Elon Musk. We talked about SpaceX earlier, and he talked years ago about building a Mecca, building a Grandizer, actually. He didn't build that one because he doesn't deliver all the time, but the structure that's supposed to receive a Starship booster is called Mechazilla, and it kind of looked like, yeah, a robotic Grandizer. Mr. Schwartz.
Is a tough one. Okay, I really like Captain Future. I must admit this. I don't know the Grandizer. Sorry for that. But I will look it up. So I think you have said something besides the other stuff, which is pretty hitting the nail on the head. Where is there on the African continent today a very well old school established space company? Nowhere. So the only things that are existing are new space companies. It's very simple because those companies working in a commercialized way. So the question that we all have to ask us across the continent is, so why are we not buying our solutions on our continent? There was yesterday this lady, unfortunately I can't spot her. I was already looking around. I think she was introduced that she had a very excellent, outstanding PhD. And she was saying something very important. When seeing the need for solutions, space-related solutions, why are we looking abroad? And not just abroad in the context to look to Algeria or look to Senegal. Why are we looking to Europe, the US, Japan, China, Russia, you name it. Oh, I forgot India and the others. I think that will really make a difference because that's how you're creating a sector. We had the brain drain topic. When you only educating, but there's no jobs available afterwards, you driving a taxi. Okay, you're using satellite applications because you need most of the time Google Maps. But I doubt that this was the purpose of studying in the first place. So I think we need some more schemes which looking truly into African solutions for African customers. And there is only new space here. There is nothing else. There's, as I said earlier in my presentation, there's new space and there's research. And research is super important, but you have to find a way to bring the research into the new space sector. I've seen a couple of examples recently where governments were looking into satellites and ask universities for that. I think it is good to ask a university to do the necessary research to have the technologies that can then in an industrialized way be built. It's super important because companies don't have the R&D to do this, in particular in the new space sector. But it should be a company who is doing it, because if universities with tax money building something like that, you, let's say, jeopardizing the new space companies, like seriously jeopardizing them, because they will never be on such cost structures. So therefore, my recommendation, my thoughts would go towards, if you want to have new space, offer the guys something that they can work for on the continent for regional, local, national, continent-wide solutions.
So creating synergy between educational institutions and the new space sector is imperative. I hope our partners at the University of Rabat will hear that and go into deeper partnerships, and we're here. We don't have much time left before the next session, so I would like to give the mic and take questions. We have about 10 minutes, so free mic. Please ask any of the guests any question you want.
Go ahead.
You're good.
Yes, hello everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you on behalf of all the common mortals who aren't in the space industry, such as me. I'm in humanities, law and political science, for making this intervention accessible and understandable for everything, because as you all said yesterday and today, the love of space never fades in our hearts, and it is the common factor for all of humanity. So my question is about the legislation of space. And as you mentioned before, as I know, the Outer Space Treaty from 1976 is the most global treaty about space regulation, and it is still flawed, as we can see in what happened with Russia last year, that has bombed their own satellite in space, which could have caused great risk for the ISS astronauts. Do you, as the epistemic community of space, think that this lack of proper legal text is a real hinder to your work, or is it just not a very big problem? Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, so I'm going to caveat this with this is not my field. But I think that, first of all, laws assume that everyone plays according to the game, right? So having a treaty only works if people agree to abide by that treaty, right? So you need to have a certain motivation to start things, right? So that, I think, is always an important aspect. But I think that also when that treaty was established, they could not imagine how we were going to be operating today. And so the safeguards that were put in place, a lot of it comes out of the law of the sea, had been done to the best of their imagination at the time. And I think that it is incredibly important for us to be kind of playing an active role in shaping that. Now, I think a really important question is, how are we as kind of citizens of emerging space nations, of African countries, getting our voices heard in that? Because I think we all know that the way that laws are constructed can exclude people as much as they include people. And so, I think this is a really important point. Like, how much effort are we putting into developing our efforts as kind of space policy advisors and lawyers? There is a Zimbabwean space law expert named Ruvimbo Samanga, does really amazing work. I think that there are many opportunities for us to contribute towards what the new kind of institutional environment is for space. And I think it is very important for us to be doing that because there are all sorts of emerging issues that haven't been figured out. Space debris is a hugely important one. You know, this week, I think Biden announced their plans on like, you know, lunar mining, right? So like none of this has been dealt with and is hugely important for us to address. Otherwise, it's going to become a little bit of a wild show. And I think that will be a very real problem for future generations.
Excuse me. Just a comment about lunar mining. There was actually a treaty that was conceived in the 80s called the Moon Treaty, and it was actually to conceive a legal framework for exploiting mining in all celestial bodies, including the moon. It has been signed by France, Morocco, but it hasn't been ratified by France or even signed or ratified by important actors like the US, China, and Russia. So even if there is a will, there isn't really coercion, there isn't really will from the big actors who actually have the possibility to mine and exploit resources from what is supposed to be res communis of humanity. And yeah.
Being a political scientist myself, I studied international relations, which was a lot of fun. I'm hearing what you're saying. Yes, there's a lot of treaties existing. Reality is, and it doesn't have to come to space. At the end of the day, treaties not getting ratified, and if they're ratified, no one cares. We're seeing this with climate change at the moment. There's a lot of activities. I think I did my first research on climate change in 2001. I think we're still at the same level, with all due respect. Nothing has really changed. We're talking a lot, but I think we're talking a lot of nonsense. However, we have developed in history now with space technology that we can really see what is pollution all about. We can really see who are the biggest emitter on the planet. We can really see who is actually damaging this planet. But as I have tried to say earlier, I mean, the critical mass is coming up now in Africa. And why not pushing more for things like that? Why not getting forward with best example? Germany tried it with the energy policy. So they tried to do something that they're calling Energiewende. It became a term even in English. They wanted to show that the biggest economy in Europe is able to supply energy just on renewable sources. Unfortunately, there were a lot of hiccups in between. Now we have this whole Russia story and Ukraine, which is not really helping either. The problem is really we need some more, on the one side, I would say, mechanisms to enforce things like that. However, at the end of the day, it's our planet. I mean, we live here. If we're not enforcing that, then we're killing it. So when we're not looking ourselves into it and enforcing ourselves to do it, then we're killing it. So therefore, I think those treaties are necessary for the Outer Space Treaty. I think I was reading that they wanted to update it now, that some people work on this. And Davis is absolutely correct. I mean, we need much more than just when it comes to space to look into, let's say, technical aspects. I was just talking to someone who was raising the point of ethics in space. I was never thinking about this, honestly. But I think it is super important. And in particular, from a personal point of view, if I'm hearing something like lunar mining, I was super interested in the presentation yesterday, what kind of influence Jupiter has on our planet. And then he mentioned what kind of influence the moon has on our planet. Just imagine we're messing the moon up. I mean, we can't even take care of our own planet. Why are we now going in another planet for mining? With all due respect. I like that we have the technology for this. But is it necessary?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much. I think Africa took first step towards dissolving the barriers for scaling up economics among the 55 member states by the free trade. What do you think others immediately we should do to dissolve these barriers and scale up all opportunities among the 55 member states. Thank you. Davis.
Sorry. Okay. I think that there is an easy opportunity to promote, for example, Pan-African University programs. So for space science, mathematics, and so on. I think that it is, one of the speakers mentioned yesterday, like it is easier to connect researchers and science. And so I think that finding ways of connecting programs at the student level, I think is a very, very easy way of addressing some of these problems. Something like SGAC is actually a good example of that, right? We have people from all over the continent here. But how do we drive more connections between at that kind of university level? And I think that one of the reasons that that's really interesting is because you start creating relationships with people who may form new companies. Like from my perspective, I spend a lot of time thinking about entrepreneurs and startups. Great startups are made when you bring people from different countries together who realize that they all have a common problem, which is not something that you would get if you just had 4 people from the same country, right? Because of course they have the same problem. But when you have the same problem across 4 countries, now you have a really interesting idea. And you create that when people are in a very, very open environment. Universities provide that. Kind of the learning environment provides that. So I think that that is one area that hasn't been explored as much, is how do we create better cooperation between universities to kind of drive this level of integration. So that would be, I think, a quick win that I think could be explored.
Thank you so much.
If I may add, something that works quite well in Europe, EU funding programs that require consortia consisting of companies from different European countries. This could be absolutely done in Africa, and it would foster closer relationships between companies from different parts of the continent.
But in Europe, it's made in an artificial way. Don't you think it's better if it happens organically? I mean, I'm always skeptical when it's enforcing our own people what to do. And
sometimes I think with things like this, sometimes you need to push a little bit in the beginning to get things going. Then once it starts, then it's going to happen. It's going to continue naturally.
Thank you so much. And with this, I would like to thank all of you, Dr. Gamgami, Mr. Schwartz, Mr. Adim, and Mr. Cook. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I hope you enjoyed this panel discussion. We're gonna have like a 10-minute break right now, and for people, the national points of contacts from SGAC, they're asked to stay here in the room. They're gonna have a little gathering between themselves. Thank you. See you in 10 minutes. For this session right now, we're going to have a panel discussion about space science and technologies. We have a very distinguished panelist today. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Eric Smith again. Thank you for being here for the second day. I also would like to welcome Drs. Nabil Suhair from Alma Lab, Alma Propulsion Lab at the University of Bologna. Dr. Rashid Amrous, please honor us and be here with us from the University of Shuaib Dukkali. I'd like to welcome Mrs. Jamila Mansouri from Head of Propulsion at the European Space Agency. And Mr. Radim Batsi, please join us here. He's representing and ground space. Well, the topics of space science and technology, they're broad and they cover so many fields. But it ranges from propulsion, electronics, material science. But here we're going to start with something related to propulsion. So brace yourself, it's going to smoke guns and gems. And I would like to ask Dr. Nabil Suhair from the Alma Propulsion Lab. My question, you do a lot of research about space propulsion, electric propulsion, and this is regarded as one of the advanced fields in propulsion. It's having like a high demand given the correct orbital correction requirements, the deep space missions. So can you tell us a bit more about your activities and also talk a bit about plasma and debunk this mysticism around the difficulty in the field of propulsion that people are usually afraid of, or usually afraid to approach, but maybe in reality it's not that difficult, it just requires perseverance.
All right, thank you for the question. So talking about electric propulsion, it is widely recognized as one of the key propulsion technologies for future deep space missions and so on. Why is that true? This is mainly because electric propulsion systems have a peculiarity with respect to chemical rockets and chemical propulsion systems, which is a very high specific impulse. They can provide a high specific impulse. For those who doesn't know what is that about, you can picture it. You can picture it like this. It's like having a system very efficient in utilizing the propellant on board on your spacecraft. Why is this important? Because if you have such a system, you can bring more payload mass because you save propellant space, and you can bring more payload mass. And we all know that 1 kilogram of payload mass is quite costly. So if you can save even 1 kilogram, it's better, right? So this is why electric propulsion is a thing, and there is a very active research community about it. And talking about this, in my experience, I'm working with novel typology of electric propulsion system, which are called the helicon plasma thrusters. All right. So what they are about? Basically, they are very simple system in which you produce a plasma, a hot plasma inside a reactor, a discharge, and then you just accelerate it through a magnetic nozzle. So this means that it's a very simple system. Simple means, from an engineering point of view, cheap and reliable. And so that's why it's taking, I mean, it's trending in the last years. So this is, let's say, my research experience, more or less. For the other question, you mentioned two questions, but my memory is very failable.
So for the second question, like in the field of space propulsion, especially like my past classmates, and what I get as a feedback from them is that propulsion seems difficult, like sophisticated. They're always afraid to approach it. How can you debunk this mysticism and tell them you are like working with some cutting edge technologies? What on your daily life do you find this difficult, or does it just require some approach which is more efficient? Or learning how to learn, which is more important than learning?
All right, I'm gonna answer with this. If I did it, you can do it. Everybody can do it. and that's everything. No, just jokes apart. So this is true that propulsion is quite a heavy subject. This is because it involves a lot of physical subjects, from thermodynamics to electromagnetism to fluid dynamics, turbomachinery. It's difficult. Nobody says the opposite. That's why they call it rocket science. But it's, as in every field in engineering, in every in other fields, you may find challenges. But the point is not about the difficulty of the specific challenge, but it's about your attitude toward that challenge. And the attitude must be like, you have to be curious, you have to be passionate about it, you have to be willing to solve that specific problem so badly that you are willing to spend your nights studying boring books of different subjects to make up a, let's say, a subject basis in order to tackle this problem. So it's not about the difficulty in per se, it's about, are you passionate about it? If you are passionate about it, then you will overcome any challenge and every obstacles in that.
Thank you. Well, now, like in the same field of propulsion, in the past we were allowed to use any kind of propulsion. We were passionate about space, and what mattered the most is how to get there first. But now we design with the, this trend of the design with demise in mind and also sustainability. And here comes Dr. Rashid Amrosi. He's one of the pioneers in the green propulsion field and the how to make space sustainable and use less toxic propulsion propellants. So can you tell us a bit how these green propellant systems are developed, how they are found out?
Thank you very much for your question. And first of all, I'm very glad to be here, to be invited as a panelist for this nice workshop. I think it's very interesting. Yes, so I am professor now at Shuaib Dukal University in El Jadida because I am originally from there. Before joining this university, I spent about 13, 14 years abroad. So between France, master course and PhD, and then short time in US and in Canada. And after that, I moved to Japan like 10 years. So, and I work in Japan with the Japanese Space Agency, JAXA, about the development of sustainable green propellant, which is a very, very hot topic now. So because, all satellites we launch now, it's contain a very harmful molecule, which is hydrazine. And there is a lot of development now to try to replace or substitute this molecule by green and sustainable systems. So we develop a lot of molecules like hydroxyl ammonium nitrate, like ammonium denitramide with ECAPS in Sweden, They're in a GRASP project. And also I worked to develop hydrogen and oxygen cryogenic system to be decomposed by some catalytic ways. And finally, we launch first satellite, which is contain one thruster, 1 Newton, very small thruster, with our GPRCS. It's a green propulsion reaction control system. And so yes, and this solution now it's already commercialized in Japan with between JAXA and also IHA company, with also in collaboration with Mitsubishi. And now so there is a lot of development in this way. And yeah, so we already success to launch like small satellites with 1 Newton to 5 Newton thruster.
Thank you. Well, I imagine like these new modular also satellites combined with green energy will make the low Earth orbit less harmful. And just to follow the threads of, we've seen some of the experts in the academia field and see what space agencies are doing. And I'd like to invite Dr. Jamila Mansouri to talk about their work, not just internally at the European Space Agency, but also with a partnership with universities, and also the initiatives that she does as a person on her free time. What I'd like to know, like, it's very impressive, like, you're the head of propulsion at the European Space Agency. Can you please guide us and tell us how did you get where you are now, and how to acquire this technical knowledge, which is well, a must to be in the propulsion field, but also what I see during my personal experience is that the management of technical stuff is also the hard thing to do. You get like bright minds, but to bring them together, that's not easy.
So before starting to mention how I get I come to that position, I would like first to thank you all of you for inviting us and make this honor to offer me to introduce my background and all what I've and all the work we are doing in ESA. I would like, in particular, to thank the little team who make it possible. And then I'm turning back to the audience. I'm very happy to see such an audience, multicultural, very, let's say, large audience. And I would like just to ask the audience to, and in particular the students, to raise their hand just to have an idea of the number of students in the audience. Yeah. Why I'm asking that is because you are our future. Myself, I have already done, I think, 2/3 of my life, perhaps less, I hope. And I think you are our future, so it's very important. What I'm saying, I have already done 2/3 of my life. It's true that, and you have to be ready. Life is made of obstacles. And I think these obstacles have to be seen as an opportunity. See everything as an opportunity. Of course, sometimes you will be at the bottom, sometimes you will be at the top. That is normal. That is part of life. But the most important thing is to keep persevering in what you want to do. That's very important. And that is what I have done. The second message I would like to pass is to say that anything impossible can be possible. I can tell you, I am an example of that. I think nobody, if you come back to the beginning, nobody will have imagined that I will reach such a position. And myself, I'm not realizing again that I am at this position, to be honest. From where I'm coming, I should mention it. I don't know if you know the word bidonville, but I'm coming from the French bidonville. My parents have been living there. And through the obstacles, through all the steps, I myself didn't know that I will become here, through the cultures. And I want to insist also because there are quite a certain number of women here, scientific women. So I'm very happy to see that there are more and more. We are encouraging because there is recently a newspaper who mentioned that unfortunately we realized that we are losing some. There was an increase and now it's again decreasing. Women are less and less embracing scientific career. So again, it's maybe more difficult because of our nature, of our culture, of our education. Yes, it's more difficult, but when you succeed, you deserve, all of you, and that you have to keep it in mind. From that, I would like now to move directly to more technical discussion, and I would like to give you a quick introduction of what we in ESA we are doing on space application and space science and technology. I will try to be quick. So I did a few slides so that then you can bring them at home as a key takeaway. Just to tell you that ESA today is we mentioned it many times yesterday. It's a huge agency composed of 5,000 people and supported by 22 member states. ESA doesn't equal European Union. We have also non-European member states, and we are continuing to sign agreement with them. We are working closely with Canada, for instance, Canadian Space Agency. So, and the objective, we are really supportive to the cooperation. And James Webb mission is one of the biggest, I think, one of a good example of cooperation, international cooperation. Why ESA? ESA is there for exploration and use of space for exclusively peaceful purpose. And I think this is something important for me. It is exactly my identity. So I was very happy to work for ESA. I am very happy. And it's over 7 sites plus site across Europe, plus a spaceport in the European spaceport in French Guiana. What does it represent in terms of budget? It's not similar to the American budget, but at least we are quite proud of this budget. And I hope that African will also reach and maybe will go further above this budget. So it represents 7.15 billion euro in 2022, meaning that any citizen in Europe is given 15 euro in their tax per year. So that they subscribe 15 euro without knowing that. And thanks to this 15 euro, we can achieve a lot of projects. So I hope that one day you will not be against to subscribe this level of budget if you want that Morocco make it. It's really, again, a collective effort, but a collective effort for the future generation. And exactly who benefits? It's you first. It's also our economy, space economy, international space economy, our planet. Don't forget, there is not only human, there is also plants, there is also animals. So we have to preserve it. And it's also our future. So you are our next generation, but there will be other generation after you. So we have to think more further. And as explorer, as I mentioned, we want to push for peaceful. And just to give you example of application, so we have a lot of application in solar system, deep space, and human and space flight, and robotic. And Artemis is part of the international cooperation where we are paving the way for the human space flight back to Moon and further to Mars. We are pushing to watch over our Earth. In particular, you see some picture like in Zanzibar, where there was a flood area. Observation, it's really also a matter of anticipation of the climate change. Connecting to your world, we discussed already. And space safety. This is really important. The number of debris is increasing. It's horrible when you see this picture. And we have to face that. At the same time, we know that there is a risk that asteroid impact the Earth. So we have also to face that. So plenty of program there. To achieve there, We need the money, as I mentioned, so collective contribution in budget, but we need also people and facilities. And I was happy this morning to see, it was Davis, I think, presentation about the EO challenge. And I think it's very good because we need facilities, we need people, we need you, and we need maybe to share the facilities. So in Africa, I hope we'll be able to identify all the facility available so that to progress. In ISA, of course, facilities are distributed all over Europe within innovation and technology in ESTEC, where I am working. Testing as well. We have a huge test center, and if you have the opportunity to pass by in Noordwijk, in the Netherlands, I will be happy to show up a little bit. We have a control room in ESOC, and also another one which belongs to French in Toulouse, and the network in Spain, but all over also the world. So this is very important. And coming back to the directorate where I belong to, I would like just to give some figures. The Directorate of Technology, Engineering and Quality, so it's about 700 people, and those 700 people, including education, are pushing a lot, pushing where in young talent, I would say. So young talent, there are, we have more than 120 young talent developing every year, and they are doing training. And thanks to that, we prepare the next step. So I think this is something that we have to continue. And not only that, in Africa, we have to really, education for me is the first step to move forward in the space application and technology. So it's essential, in particular, if you want to progress in propulsion, because it's a long way, I can confirm. Propulsion cannot be done like this, but physics remain the same. So we are happy, we are at the same, we are treated at the same level, physics are the same everywhere. So it means that everybody can manage such technologies as well. I want to insist on the fact that we try to also push the initiative, and this initiative through education. So I just put a link in my presentation on what ISA is doing, so that to inspire you, but also there are opportunity if you have partnership with some universities in Europe, in the member state of ISA. If in particular the International University of Morocco has already partnership, there are possibility to join to two specific challenges that I put on the right side. The first one is for concurrent engineering challenge. So for instance, if you are doing your PhD in Metz or in Lyon or whatever, you could try to join and do a concurrent engineering. And the second one is the ISA Academy. So I will let you have a look, the link are there, so that you can see for those who are having already an international career in their studies, in particular in the ISA member state, you can also try to join such challenges, because you will get a lot of knowledge, know-how, and you will acquire a lot of answer to all the questions you have. In addition to ISA, the other initiative we have that are more conducted outside ISA. So I want to, the first one, Acting Space, I'm not in, I should mention it, but it's a friend of mine who is developing that. It's Acting Space. So Acting Space, for those who knows, it's CNES, ISA, and many stakeholders, and you see the logo on the bottom. That are contributing. We see Airbus, for instance, contributing to Acting Space, which come from an idea. So I think it's CNES who has the initial idea to do hackathon. So they gather students, and in a team of students with a project. So the thema are shared, and in one day, more or less, with some experts, some mentors, they build a project, a full project. And it's really intense. It's 24 hours, the hackathon. And then at the end of this hackathon, in fact, you have a short list of teams that are selected, and they will submit the year after. So in fact, the 2022-2023 has already started. It was last week. Some African, so there were a Burkinabe team, a Togo team, I think. there were a few teams that participate to this hackathon thanks to the ASO. So I recommend you to go to the website of ASO and see if Morocco, for instance, want to join to the Acting Space. And ASO can help you to implement Acting Space in Morocco. So it is in partnership with Visa and the CNES. There are prizes at the end, and you learn a lot with experts, in fact. The other initiative is some lecture. So it's on the Tunisian side. A friend of mine, we decided to create a university for freedom and for increasing knowledge, in particular turned to Africa. And this year, so I will participate. I will deliver some lecture in project management for space early next year at the M University. What I didn't add here, because I cannot do a lot of things, unfortunately. I would like to do more, to be honest, if I could. I am also in charge of an NGO. I'm the president of an NGO named AeroCoach, which mission is in particular to coach some people, so the excellence of the African country, by bringing to them an opportunity to have a complementary study in the member state, ESA member state, and have their first expertise so that they develop themselves and they become really the future generation that will develop technology in Africa. It's a kind of transfer of technology without the intellectual property of the place you are coming from, because the intellectual property is your brain. So this is to sum up. Thank you.
Thank you. One thing is for sure is that, like, in the presence of propulsion experts, it's almost impossible to avoid explosions and fire. And I already see some sparkles over there in your eyes. So let's extinguish this fire and move and stay on the level of space agencies. I'd like to ask Dr. Smith about the national programs and also especially the scientific space missions, which are usually regarded as not bringing return of investment. But the things like James Webb Space Telescope or DART mission, can you talk a bit about like how these concepts are defined, like from their infancy till the execution, and for example, how until the stage where you put, for example, James Webb Telescope on the Lagrange point? One thing also is I believe that there is an offer-demand gap in the experts in the field. So what advice would you give to our young people today to satisfy these requirements and pursue a career in and be part of these amazing scientific missions?
Okay, thank you, Sarhan. It's great to be back here today. And the process you described about how NASA, or I know the process is actually very similar in ESA, how do we decide what science missions we're going to do? And then ultimately, how does that translate down into what we need to build? So I'll discuss how we do it in the US, since I'm most familiar with that. About every 10 years, we ask our National Academy of Sciences to do a survey of the field of interest. So in my case, it's astronomy, but there are ones for planetary science and earth science, and even heliophysics. And so this is about a 2-year process whereby scientists from that field take input from the community. And our most recent one, the National Academy report, came out in 2021 for astronomy. There were, I think, almost 400 white papers submitted to several different panels, and then they prioritize what science is most important to do for the next 10 years. In the case of the US, this covers both ground-based and space-based, and they come out with a report of recommendations for all of astronomy, for ground-based, and for space-based. So that's really where we get our scientific direction from, is the scientific community. Now, people at NASA, there are scientists at NASA, and they can participate in that process too. But it's important for the agency to remember at the policy level that it's not those of us at NASA headquarters or any center picking what science the agency will do. It's the scientific community telling us this is the important science that we need to do over the next 10 years. And so the community has recommendations for small things and for big things. JWST was the #1 recommendation in the 2000 survey. So the big missions take a long time. If you follow the history of the process in the US, turns out our big missions take on average 17 years from when they are first recommended to when they are actually operating. So that's something to keep in mind as you're starting your career. If you start out on something big, it may take a long time, and it may, in some sense, be unsatisfying because you don't see the fruition of your labor immediately. So as you start out, it's sometimes better to start on these smaller missions, the small recommendations where you see a return on investment in a couple of years. And seeing the life cycle of a project, I think, is really important. Because then you learn steps along the way. You will make mistakes when you are designing, you will make mistakes when you are building, you will make mistakes when you are testing, and you will make mistakes when you are operating. And the quicker you go through that cycle means you won't make that mistake the next time you do it. And so frequently you'll find at NASA the younger engineer and science staff work on the missions that have a smaller life cycle so they can learn those lessons. And not pass them on to the big missions. We make enough mistakes on the big missions that we don't need to repeat them. Let's see, the second part of your question concerned the technologies.
And the gap between experts in the field and, for example, NASA requirements for highly qualified people.
I think if I were to be starting out on the engineering side, so science is a little different, but if I were to be starting out on engineering, now if you have a particular discipline you like, if you love propulsion, you should do propulsion. But if you aren't quite certain what you want to do, look at where the space agencies have short or minimal suppliers for some things. There are some types of devices, they might be transponders for communications, or they might be in ASIC design. If you see there are few providers there, that's a place that there's going to be a gap because what both national space agencies, ESA or NASA, like is when there's a multiplicity of vendors that they can go to get their products. And when it goes down to just one or two, then they fall what's called the critical path. And we had an example on web about in the middle of development when we were developing our cryo cooler for the joint ESA-NASA instrument called MIRI. We needed valves in the cryo cooler system, cryogenic valves. There was one person in the world who was making those valves. Now, it just so happened that this person they were very competent, but they were difficult to work with. And when NASA was having issues and saying, oh, we're struggling with these valves, that person took it personally and was saying, well, then you can't have my valves. And of course, we needed those valves. So you don't ever want to be doing your mission and be sort of held captive by just one technology. So as you're looking at that, I would encourage you to see, look through stories about space missions, and is there a particular thing they're falling down on, or is there a weakness in that area? Because if you go into that area, that's where you can have a lot of impact. So that's what I would encourage.
Okay, well, to follow up on the same context of looking where there is a need for example, some sort of expertise or field. Well, usually these materials, like to learn them, there is like a steep learning curve, and the current requirements sometimes might be this position might be available for the moment, but how does science fiction, that's a topic we didn't discuss during the last 2 days. Science fiction, does it help into projecting what might happen in the future?
Of course it does, but oftentimes it's projecting a need that's pretty far in the future. And while the need may be in 20 or 30 years, you need to pay rent next month. So you want to maybe think about where things are going, A good area where things are always going is anything associated with the detector development, whether they be in any wavelength. If you are at all interested in any aspect of electrical engineering or materials engineering, detector development is where scientists will always want more and better detectors. And so that is something you can think about the science fiction of these future missions, but they will always need better detectors. That's where I would recommend, if I were going into engineering now, I would look into detector development.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think also that it could be a profession to write about space science, science fiction. Well, I'd like to move on. Well, with any hardware we send into space, it has to be connected. It requires redundancy systems. It has to be reliable, whether in low Earth orbit or maybe just interplanetary missions. And here radiation is key. And also here with us today, Radim Batsi, he's an expert in telecommunication, and he's seen from a closer perspective how these new changes and new constellations might have an impact. And my question would be, how do you deal, for example, with the International Telecommunication Union? How do you make the process of launching new stuff and connecting and having these bands of telecommunication to achieve the requirement of your customers, for example? And also, not only in space and orbit, but on the ground level, does ground stations play a key role to answer the needs of the market?
Well, thank you for this question. I think this is a very interesting question because this is where we see a gap between legal frameworks, regulations, and the actual needs of the market. I mean, the first point I'd like to address: how do we deal with the ITU? Well, usually through national regulators. And this is where things get complicated, because we'd like to think that space is global. We all work together towards a common goal. In reality, regulations can be used. Differences in regulations can be used as a competitive advantage, and there could be even unfair competition. So what we see, for instance, we had an interesting chat with a few people yesterday about satellites that only get launched to secure frequency allocations. So basically, when you request a frequency allocation from your regulator, you have to actually. Thank you. Hopefully, this is going to be better. So when you request the frequency allocation from a regulator, you need to start transmitting within a certain period of time. And some companies, or actually quite a few companies, circumvent these rules by launching, I would say, dummy satellites that serve no purpose other than transmitting something to reserve that frequency. And this is, I mean, to me, as an engineer, it's a little bit insane. We're contributing to the space debris problem. So I think this is, but yeah, this is something we need to work with. I think we need to lead by example on our national and regional level. What was, I think there was a second part to your question.
I talked about the radiation and keeping stuff interconnected, the reliability and redundancy systems required to, for example, ensure a launch mission and keep a rocket in trajectory. So that's also, I think, the communication is key here.
Absolutely, and so this is the subject I actually mentioned in my talk yesterday, radio spectrum management, where we see increasing problems with radio interference we're having more and more trouble keeping, making sure that communications are reliable. Luckily, this is something that's being worked on, and one technology that's extremely promising, and that's, I would say, from my perspective, it's a game changer, laser communications, where you have essentially a very narrow beam, and this opens up, this solves this problem of reliability, and it opens up so many interesting possibilities, because the data rates you can achieve are much higher. So like missions, for example, science missions can downlink much more data. So I think this is the direction we're headed, and it's very exciting.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm sure like the audience has so many questions. They might be diverse, so we would like to hear them. And so.
Do we do that as a company? Because I know that the government has to apply for the country, not the company to apply itself. So how is that process going?
If you're a company, you go through your national regulator. There is a process that's slightly different in each country, but essentially the way it works, you specify what you need, which frequency band, how much spectrum you actually need, how much bandwidth. You submit an application, and depending on where you are, it can take anything from 6 months to 2 or 3 years to get processed. The size of the satellite, as far as the radio side of things, it doesn't really matter.
Hi, can I ask my question?
Yeah, thank you. Next question, please.
Thank you, dear panelists, for this amazing panel, and we're honored to be here and learn from you. So my question is to Dr. Smith. So you mentioned that the prioritizing projects within NASA is done within a discussion, and there's an organization that is working with the NASA scientists to decide which projects are prioritized. I was going to ask if Starshade is one of those priorities of NASA, because I've seen and I've heard, if any of you heard Gravity Assist, it was a challenge online on GrabCAD for everybody to investigate and try to find a solution to this problem NASA is showcasing to the world. And so is Starshade one of your priorities?
Okay, so the Starshade is a technology that would be used for exoplanet imaging. There are 2 ways we do that with telescopes now. We use coronagraphs, which, the simple example of a coronagraph is if you go outside and the sun is very bright and you just put your hand up to block the sun. That is a sort of a 0th order coronagraph. Much more complex coronagraphs are designed to be within a telescope that has a spot that you put on top of your bright source to block it out. In fact, the next telescope NASA is building, the Roman Space Telescope, has a coronagraph in it for doing just that, for looking for planets near bright stars. The most recent decadal survey did talk about Starshade technology. Now, a Starshade is, again, using the same principle, but now you have a very large structure that is hundreds of thousands of kilometers away from your spacecraft, and you maneuver that object over the star and you look at it. It has certain advantages over an internal coronagraph. It has many more complications operationally, because now not only you have two spacecraft and not just one. NASA's investing in technology development. It's my personal opinion that Starshade probably won't be ready. It certainly won't be ready for Roman when it launches. Could someone propose a Starshade to work with Roman? That's always a possibility. In addition to specific missions that these surveys recommend, they always recommend that there be a competition process for smaller missions. And so we always do that. And so if somebody proposes a Starshade to work with Roman and it convinces their peers, that's a possibility. I think where NASA is looking right now is more perfecting the internal coronagraph, just because the external coronagraph is seen as much more technically challenging. And you also want to think about your ConOps, your operations concept. It's not very efficient with the Starshade, because one star you want to look over here, and so now your Starshade is here. But if your next one is here, now you've got to move your Starshade all the way down here. It's a very frail structure, so you have to think how it moves. You have to worry about micrometeoroid impacts. You have to worry about thermal differences. So it is better in the long run, but it is much more challenging in the near term.
Thank you.
One more question, please.
First of all, thank you for being with us and for the rather amazing discussion that panelists have held. My question is for Dr. Smith. I don't think I would be wrong if I said you're probably the one who spent the most time in this space in this room. And my question is rather a little bit personal. You've worked obviously on many projects. One of them is the James Webb Telescope, and you've dedicated basically your lifetime for this. My question is, what is it like to dedicate a lifetime to this industry, and what tips would you have for us or those of us who are just getting started?
Well, actually, thank you for that question. That's I really like that. Of course, when I started on Webb, I thought it was going to be something I would do for about 5 to 7 years. So I miscalculated greatly at the start of that. When I was working at the Goddard Space Flight Center, I started out there. I did a little bit of work on Hubble, which by then was already built. I worked a little bit on the ground system, some software. But I saw in the team that worked on Hubble, this incredible camaraderie that those people by then had been on. I think their journey was maybe about 15 years for them. And they just acted. They had a little swagger about them as they walked around the center, and they were Team Hubble. I thought, like, oh, that looks like that would be fun to work on something like that someday. Then there was a little career hiatus, not hiatus, but I went off and did something different, a shuttle-based telescope, much shorter time scale. And so when the opportunity came to work on sort of a Hubble successor, I thought, oh, that would be good. And maybe I'll do that for a few years, and then I'll do something else. So it ended up taking much longer, but that incredible camaraderie was there. And that's something I'll always treasure. Some of you here may work with each other for decades, and that's irreplaceable. Of course, it has to be in some really compelling vision. You can imagine spending a career doing something you don't enjoy, and you shouldn't do that. The space industry, whether you're looking at Earth, whether you're telecom, whether you're thermal engineers doing something, it's always very exciting. And long-term projects, if you can get on them, are great. There is that benefit for seeing returns quicker. And some of it is just personality based. Some people need to get that return quicker. I was willing to wait because I thought Webb would be amazing, and it turns out it is. So I feel very lucky to have been part of it.
And the second part would be, and I'm very appreciative of the first answer, but what tips would you have for those of us who are just getting started? Perhaps not on a career level, but
Yeah.
on a more personal level.
On a personal level, you have to be willing to fail, be willing to ask a question and have some people look at you and go like, geez, why that guy ask that question? He should have known that. When you're asking the question, even though there may be one person who knew the answer and says that, almost everybody else didn't know the answer. So you have to be really willing to take risk, which is tougher earlier on in your career because you don't want to make mistakes then. But if you're not afraid to fail and you keep at it, the people who you are working for, they'll recognize that and they'll say, he or she, yeah, they didn't get it right the first time, but they kept going. So I would say that, be bold, but be persistent. And the persistence in the end is what will carry you to where you want to go.
Very, very thank you. Very much. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Can we have a brief question? Because if you want, we can. Mrs. Jamila has some tips for you. She's gonna display a brief explanation of what your career path you can follow, some tips, some recommendations.
Okay, so my brief question, hey, it's Charles again. My brief question is just to know what are looking at the upstream segment, what are some of the critical infrastructure you believe your respective institution can, should, or must support in Africa, in the space industry in general? So this question is open to anyone.
Sorry, can you repeat it very quickly? Sorry.
Okay, so the question is just to know what are, looking at the upstream segment, what are the critical infrastructure that you believe your institution, ESA, NASA, and any others, should, would, or must support in Africa that can contribute to the general space industry in the world?
All right, this is a quite a good question. So critical infrastructure in order to support in Africa. I mean, of course, the greater criticality that I see is about hardware. So I'm talking about all the upstream from the ground space to the satellites and the launchers and so on. So how can our institutions support this? I would say, first of all, knowledge transfer. So building up programs in order to train the future African engineer, the future African scientists, and so on, in order to design all these critical aspects of the upstream hardware. But this doesn't mean that African engineers or anyway, African scientists shouldn't start right now, because there's always something you can do. There are many aspects. For example, in the downstream, I can think about the most obvious thing is remote sensing, for example, leveraging data which are freely available. If you think about the Copernicus mission or the NASA Landsat mission, I think, I'm not sure, which are all data which is available, and it can be leveraged in order to do startups, to do science, and foster a space ecosystem in the African countries. At the same time, we need, this has to come from, of course, Europe and US and so on, Asia as well, knowledge transfer programs. We need to do this. And the African people that goes and gets this know-how, they have to be willing to come back and bring this know-how to their country and start developing the hardware, the upstream. This is in order to have an autonomous space program for in the African countries. And I will talk about it later in a keynote. One example for doing this could be, for example, thinking about spaceports. Spaceport can be a nice example of attracting international clients both in the launcher industry and in the satellite industry. That could be an example. And Africa is a very, very favorable place for placing a spaceport, because if you think about the equator and so on, yeah, Africa is the best. Is the best place. But no spoiler alerts. I will talk about it later in my keynote.
I will complement, to be honest, in particular, due to the crisis context that has changed a lot the behavior of various countries towards the dependency. As you know, space is a little bit dual in the sense that it serves peaceful application, but also military application. Let's say security and national interest. However, sometimes we cannot do everything. We don't have the industry for. And in particular, we procure already outside our, let's say, outside Europe or outside US, we procure already some technology. Think about which technology are procured outside, mainly in China, for instance. Try to seek which are these technology that are procured in China, for instance, and try to think, well, maybe those Europe, US, needs to have a double source. They want to develop maybe in their own country. It's true. We would like to be independent, more or less, or to have more cooperation with friends. And then we have to accelerate, nevertheless, when we are facing this issue of crisis. So think about what we have procured for long in Russia or in China, because this is more or less the trend, or even think about how Africa wants to position itself technically with respect to the geopolitics. And where you see weaknesses, here you have a good opportunity to be a strength for you. So it's a way to, I don't know if I have been clear, but just where we are dependent, so it's an opportunity, it's where you should go, in fact.
Those are actually excellent points. There are many things, I'll say one that always comes to my mind, just because I'm like a scientist, not an engineer, is batteries. Everybody needs batteries for their spacecraft. And it always seems like you're having trouble procuring your batteries. So there are some common technologies that are niches that you could look at. And now here, I'll display my own ignorance about how the African Space Agency works. But at some level, it might be helpful if there was an organizing or an oversight structure that could help provide an interface to the rest of the world space agency like ESA or NASA. It's very complicated if I'm at NASA and I'm a project manager and I think, oh, I want to, I hear there's some, good technologies, in Morocco, and I'm going to get them. Now, do I talk to the African Space Agency? Do I talk to the Moroccan Space Agency? And we don't think about that when we go to cooperate with Europe. We go to ESA, and ESA will figure out where's best for us to work and manage the countries participating. Right now, if that function is being provided by the African Space Agency, that's a simple interface for us to work with, and we like that. It's much more complicated if we have to try to think, oh, do I need to work with this country, with that country? If I work with this one, is that going to be, will that put me in a bad light with the next one? So that's just maybe from a selfish perspective, how it's easier for us to work with you if we have one-stop shopping, so to speak.
Well, we hope those recommendations we'll try to report them in our report that will be submitted to the United Nations, and it will help space agencies to invest more and have these collaborations. I'm sorry, we have to stop because some of our speakers, they have a really tight schedule, and we have the working group sessions, and we want to do a group photo before the lunch break. So
if I may just to mention, I will share my slide, and I have a slide that give a kind of visual of the different type of let's say phase where you could be involved in the future, from very advanced studies and research and technology to a more operational, job, or development, R&D, to come to product. And there is another role which is important, because I mentioned the geopolitics, to understand what's happening and where you want to choose to develop yourself. We need more and more entrepreneur skill, strategy, customer. It's another skill, in fact. It's not specifically space, but we need entrepreneur skill as well, on top of purely scientific and an engineer and this kind of skill in space application. This is just to figure out what are the area, because on the if you have all these skills together, then it can make happen and deliver solution to accelerate the development in Africa.
Thank you. We're very grateful. Seeing you here was really rewarding for our workshop. So we'll go to have well, I will show you the working groups where they're gonna take place, the rooms, and then we're gonna proceed with the group picture, and then we will have the lunch break before the working group sessions.
Please, I just want to mention that the group picture is going to be taken outside. So if you please can join outside, we're going to have the group picture, then you can have lunch. And after that, please, everyone at 2 should be in their respective classes for the working groups. The working group's going to take place from 2 to 4. We have a tight schedule. Please be on time so that we can have the recommendations on time as well. And after that, we're going to have the closing ceremony with more keynotes. Thank you so much.